Hi there, Tara here with Quilts with Love. I'm back today with a short, informal series about choosing fabric for your quilt. I've had a couple of people reach out and ask me, about how they're going to choose fabric for their first memory quilt. And it occurred to me that if this is your first project, you might actually want to take a step back and do a practice project first. When it comes to memory quilts, if you're using the one and only t-shirt or the one and only garment that you have, you get one shot. So I would highly encourage that you take a practice project first. Let's talk about choosing some fabric for those practice projects. So today we're talking, in my last video we talked about choosing the quality of your fabric and then choosing the pre-cut or yardage style fabric that you're going to need. Today we're going to talk about joining the prints of fabric. We're also going to talk about what each type of print is and how you can blend them all nicely together in your quilt to have a really pleasing aesthetic in the end. So the first thing I want to do is just define for you real quick some general definitions of the types of fabrics that you're going to see when you go to the quilt shop. The first type of fabric you're going to see is going to be a solid. Solids are exactly that. They are a solid color of fabric and they don't have any print on them. Solids are great for memory quilts especially. I always add a solid because it blends nicely and it helps everything else in your quilt stand out. Often we'll use solids as our background fabrics. You'll also find tone-on-tone or tonals. There is a little bit of a difference. Tone-on-tone is a type of fabric that reads as a solid. So you usually can't see the print unless you're looking at it very closely and you've got really good lighting. White on white is one of the most common tone-on-tones that you will find, and the print on it just adds a little bit of a shimmer and a little bit of a texture without actually adding a print to your quilt. You can use it interchangeably with a solid if you choose. You're also going to find a tonal, which is more of an amorphous style of print. Usually it'll be a monochromatic. What that means is all of the colors in your tonal are very similar or within the same color wheel. And a tonal will add texture, but it's not actually a solid and it doesn't necessarily read as a solid. What I have here is two varieties, two different styles of a tonal. Now this one, it just adds a nice texture, but you can clearly see that there are lighter and darker parts of this fabric. Another one that I've got here, this tonal has a light green, a medium green, a dark green. You can see clearly that it's a print, but when you're adding this with other fabrics, it's only going to show as texture, not necessarily a distinct print. So that makes it really nice for blending with high and low volume prints, which I'll talk about here in just a second. Makes it a really nice blender to go with all of the other things that you've got in your quilt. So then let's talk about noticeable prints, high and low volume. This is an area that I feel like sometimes people maybe get confused about, and it doesn't have to be confusing if you just approach it as how noticeable is that print going to be in my finished quilt. Because really, as far as high and low volume go, it's all relative. What might seem like a very low volume print in one quilt paired next to a certain grouping of fabrics, if it disappears in that background, it's going to be a low volume print in that quilt. But then if you put it next to some tonals and some solids in maybe a modern style print, suddenly the background fabric for quilt A is now a focus fabric and a high volume print in comparison to the other fabrics that you pair it with. So, for example, a low volume print is one where the printing on it doesn't necessarily stand out. It can kind of melt into the background, but again, it's definitely a relative thing. So if you put this pink stripey next to a blender or a tone-on-tone, suddenly it livens up a little bit and it's a little bit more catching to your eye. You're going to notice it. But if you put this stripey, the same print that was just a low volume print, next to, let's pick this one. Suddenly now, the focus of your eye and the focus in these fabrics is going to go straight to the medallion print because it's a little bit lighter, it's a little bit brighter, and the print on it is actually much larger. So in that case, this would be a low volume versus a higher volume print. Generally, and I know I talked about buying fabric bundles in the previous video, but generally your fabric bundle is going to have a nice collection of high and low volume prints. It's also going to have different types of a motif printed on that fabric. So what does that mean? Let's move into the second topic. So after you have the high and low volume kind of figured out and you've got all of these prints that you're looking at, or you've grabbed a bundle and you're like, oh, this is beautiful, I love them all. Which ones do you use? Well, let's look at the print on the fabric. So in general, you're going to want a good mixture of soft and scrolly motifs, large print motifs, and then also some smaller print motifs to blend together all in your quilt. So there's really just a couple types of prints. You're going to have a geometric print, which is going to be a geometric design. So you're always going to want a good geometric print, and it doesn't have to be high or low volume. It could be either, just enough to add a little bit of contrast in the design of the fabrics. So this one from farther away, it's probably going to read as a hexagon or to have that hexagonal shape. So that's really nice. You're also going to have some nice swirls, some really soft edges to kind of take that soft edge off of some of those hard line geometrics. Usually in every fabric line, you're going to find some type of a stripe, a pin stripe, or a polka dot. And that's just to add a little bit of textural variety to your prints. And then, of course, you're always going to have, well, mostly, always going to have a little bit of floral involved there too. So whether it's a high volume floral, a low volume floral, a lot of fabric lines will include that floral because it's a nice soft motif that can stand next to your solids and your geometrics, and it just adds a softness to the overall look of your quilt. So once you understand that you have different types of tones, different types of prints on fabric, and then you have different shapes in those prints on fabric, now let's talk about how we blend them all together. So these are all different fabric lines. I just kind of went to my stash and grabbed things, and I was like, oh, hey, this one I might actually end up making a quilt. I don't know. So in this little grouping that I have here, I have that nice stark solid. That'll make everything else pop when you put it in your quilt. Anytime you're using a solid, everything else is just going to stand apart from that solid. It's like magic. Especially when you're using a dark color solid, it will fade into the background and everything appears to have physical dimension, like three-dimensional shapes. It's actually why I use solids in my gallery frames design. So then I've got here also a very high volume, large print, floral, if I were going to make this quilt. And then I have, this would actually kind of look like a polka dot if you used it in a quilt. And then because they're nice and neatly organized and very symmetrical, it could also look a little bit like a stripe, depending on how you used it and the size of cuts of fabrics that you had. Then I've got this cute little teardrop. It's a gray and cream, and the teardrop shape would technically count as a geometric. And then I've got the gray on gray kind of cross-hatching tonal. So if you put all of these together in a quilt, they're all going to blend really nicely, and because none of them are the same, they're going to play off of each other and just add a little bit more interest to your quilt. So then the question becomes like, but what if I don't like prints? What if I just want to use solids? Of course, you could do that too. Ombre is super popular, and you don't even have to use a monochromatic palette. You can use any variety of colors that you want. And when you're using a solid, It's really nice if you understand value. So this is tip number 3 for this video, how you play with value in your quilt. Value as far as colors of fabric goes, do you have lights, mediums, and dark color fabrics? And is there a good or even distribution of all of them? Lights are going to be your highlights usually, and then the darks are going to fade into the background. Unless you have a really light quilt, then those dark colors are going to pop right out at you. So one thing, and this is just my number one, I guess, bonus tip, I guess, for this video, is that when you are comparing value for your quilt, whether you're using solids or you're using prints or you're using any combination, grab your phone and lay all of your fabrics out together. Just fan them out so you can see them. Take a color photo first, and then take a black and white photo. When you look at that black and white photo, what do you notice first? Do you notice that you have a lot of really dark fabric? Do you notice that you have a lot of really light fabric? Do you notice one that sticks out more than the others? Or one that just doesn't seem to go at all? That's how you're going to get that really nice cascading ombre look. And that's how you're going to get really nice contrast in all of your quilt blocks. So take some time, go through your fabric stash if you have one. If not, go to the fabric shop. Go to your local quilt shop and just put some fabrics together, lay them out on a table, take some pictures, and find some prints, some tones that you love, and get started on a quilt project today. For more tips, tutorials, and of course, free patterns, check us out at quiltspluslove.com.